chop it up. Come to the show. We got some things we can talk about. Chop it up. Chop it. Chop it up. Chop. We got some things we could talk about. Chop it up. Chop it. Chop it up. Chop it up. Chop it. We got some things we could talk about. Come to the show. We about to chop it up. Come to the show. We got some things we could talk about. Come to the show. We about to chop it up. Come to the show. We got some things we could talk about. Chop it up. Chop it. Chop it. Chop it up. Chop it. We got some things we could talk about. Chop it up. Chop it. Chop it. Chop it up. Chop it up. Chop it. We got some things we could talk about.
Whew. Man. Welcome to another episode of the Chop Shop. I am your host, Pastor Marvin McKenstry Jr., and I'm excited about today's show. Although I am tired as ever, man, I want to bring to the screen my right hand and my left hand, my main man on the ones and twos, techniques, 1200s only, because anything else is undignified. The one and only Mr. Shaka Pitts. What's going on, man?
What's good, brother? What's good, man? I'm glad to see you on the show. I was worried, man. You know, you've been wearing a lot of hats, good brother. You've been carrying a lot of emotions on your shoulders, man. So I'm glad to see you here, man. And
that's why in this installment of the news, it's only one bit of news that I can give to our wonderful audience, and that is Bay is resting and recovering well. My grandmother has been since this past Saturday in a bout with her health. Y'all know she's 85 years old, but she's 85 years strong. And to see her kind of decline to the place that she was declining to with some, and ain't no shame over here. She had some kidney issues going on that really brought her all the way down. But I want to say that I'm grateful for all the prayer warriors that's been standing on the wall in prayer. And I couldn't wait to get on the air tonight to give all of the faithful listeners and those who care about my bae an update that she is in Sinai Hospital at this point. She's resting and recovering well. I was up there today and she was in rest mode. So I said, you know what? I'm going to get on out of here and I'm going to rest myself because, boy, I am about to pass. I'm tired, brother. I almost missed airtime over there on my couch, knocked out.
Listen. I hit you up for a few. I hit you up for a few things we needed. I'm like, okay. I'm like, all right. I'm checking the time. Like, okay, where the good brother at?
Man, I had the alarm set for 10 minutes of, brother, and I didn't budge. So I'm saying, look, when 10 minutes of came, you ever did that thing where you sit up and your head got to come together like, oh boy, man, listen. Being able to see her resting comfortably and out of pain today is going to be the inspiration for me to get off the air, go to my bed, close my eyes and sleep. I have not slept good in about 5 days. But again, I thank all the prayer warriors, all our faithful listeners. Y'all put some hearts and some likes up because she is doing well. And they got to the bottom of some stuff, which is like the most exciting part of it for me, that we got clarity on some of the things that needs to happen in order for her to continue the great quality of life that she's had. So again, thank you, my prayer warriors.
Yeah, that's dope, Mom. I'm glad to hear that. And shout out to everyone on there that's definitely showing the love already. Sister Ella, how you doing? Miss Brenda, Brenda's there. Latoya, Sylvia, we here, man.
All right, Let's rock and roll, man. Listen, we got a great show for you tonight, but before we get into the show, we got to get into these church announcements. And the very first announcement, as always, is our Stop the Beef hotline. We are still in this city making inroads into the various things and conflicts that are costing people's lives and doing a great work and making sure that there's intervention, whether it's financial intervention or whether it's just some sort of mediation. Y'all gotta, I'm sitting there trying not to yawn. Y'all better not judge me tonight. I'm telling y'all, because I'm sitting there tired as I don't know what. The two numbers you see on the screen, 443-431-3705 or 443-522-7848 is what you want to hit up in order to make sure that there's a man always manning these lines and the brotherhood will come together to do the necessary intervention to help save lives. With that being said, we still hitting the city up with our peace agreement. We going to and fro This Saturday, we're going to be out Cherry Hill, and it's going to be another opportunity for us to connect with some of the real ones. We are connecting boots on the ground brothers who are in the struggle. If you get what I'm saying, brothers that are still out here getting it how they live, still a part of the street organization culture, and they are agreeing to this peace agreement that's simply saying we will not, even if we got to eat in the street, we won't have to necessarily die killing these streets. So we want you to continue to pray for that. I need everybody to come out tomorrow. We're going to be at 1063 West Fair Street at my church. I called on a few friends of mine. And listen, y'all, this is completely impromptu, no rehearsal. You see on the screen some great singers, people who are known in their own rights. We got Pastor Kenneth Flight. We got Sister Ashley Banks and Bishop Donnie Neal. But the fun thing about this is we're going to come together with no rehearsal and we're going to sing together. And it's for a good cause. There's no cover charge. We want everybody to come and give a free will offering, whether it's 50 cents or 25 or $50. It's all going towards the great back to school work that we do annually in the Po Homes community. So again, come out tomorrow night at 7:30. It's going to be a great live band, and you're going to have some great singing and an opportunity to it's still all going to be ministry. So then on Saturday night, there is, I like how you put these in order, Shaka. You always jumping out there doing something, my brother. Saturday night, hooking up with Rich Mike, Cherry Hill Mike, my guy. And it's going to be a prayer walk and community engagement, right? Starting from his place at the Cherry Hill Resource Center, 844 Round Road, the old Patapsco Elementary Middle School, engaging with the community, man, and trying to mobilize resources. And look, y'all, I'm going to try to be out there because by that time of night, visiting hours are over, and I love to be out there, and we constantly getting hit up with them employers with jobs. And I want to be out there to be a blessing, man. So y'all make sure y'all come on out past Ebony Harvin, my man, our Dr. Aaron Hanna, all that. That's their neighborhood. We're going to go represent for them. So then on August the 6th, our next fundraiser for our back to school drive is something called Painting with Purpose. You heard of the sipping paint. We ain't sipping because it's in the name of the Lord that we coming. But we do want you to buy a ticket or participate, send a donation or something, because all of the proceeds from each of these activities that you're seeing are going to this great back to school drive and community unity day that we're putting together for what I call the Lexington Terrace Po Homes community. Last week, we had a great reunion, man, the Lexington Terrace reunion. I didn't get them to shock today, but in the next coming show, I'm going to put some of the pictures up, man. Our neighborhood came back together. Shaka went out there and played softball like it was 5 years ago, and I was in shape and prepared, brother. And Monday, I paid for it. All right. I think that's we got one more announcement, and this is what all of those proceeds, everything that you're participating with and helping us to do goes towards this. You see it, Callaway Road, Po Homes, Poppleton, Vintage Poppleton Place, Vintage Gardens, and the Townsend Terraces. These are the 5 communities that were once our Lexington Terrace Po Homes community under different management and names, but we bringing all of them together, bringing all of the community associations and leaders together, and we want to be a blessing on August 21st. We are looking for volunteers, and we're also looking for people who want to make donations. Monetary donations can be made to $ capital V, capital H, capital W, capital C, lowercase ENTER. That is $ VHW Center for monetary donations. If you want to drop off school supplies, hit me up and we'll make arrangements to be able to get those school supplies. Because on this day, listen, man, the favor of the Lord has already blessed us with a DJ. It's blessed us with food. Like, we got a business that stepped up and said, don't worry about it. We're not only going to bring the food, we're going to cook the food for you and all that sort of thing. We want to be able to make sure that it's a day that our neighborhood that's so in need of healing can understand that we as leaders are unified to do this great thing and this great work on August the 21st. If you want to volunteer, hit me up. If you got donations, hit me up. Or you can send your monetary donations to that Cash App right there. I'm excited because we're working with one of my sisters in the faith, the pastor of Impulse Church, as we still believe in. I still believe is the moniker for Bishop Brandon Leake. We're working with his great wife, man. This is an awesome sister in the Lord, still on the wall in spite of everything that's happening on Pastor Letitia Lisa and the IC Nation. I thank God for you guys, man. You guys have literally inspired me to want to continue to do the great work that we're doing in the community with your efforts. All right. You see this guy on here now talking about he will see me soon. He going to donate. Man, this guy kept me out way past my bedtime shock at the Lexington Terrace reunion. And I don't think I've been right ever since. But moving right on into this great dialogue that we have today, I got one of my big brothers in this city, a man who I respect, who I've learned a lot from. He's a wealth of knowledge, and he has a testimony similar to mine where God literally turned his life around, and he committed his second chance to being able to do everything he can for Baltimore with a major push in the area of criminal justice reform. This brother was at the head of one of the only other recognized reports that was put together other than the DOJ report that prompted our consent decree. The only other report they recognized was one that he was a part of the committee and really in the lead of. I got to bring to the stage my very own brother and friend, big brother even in that, Mr. Ray Kelly, Mr. West Baltimore, Mr. St. Peter Claver, Mr. Consent Decree, Mr. Police Reform. What's up, big bro? It's been a while since I had you on, man.
What's going on, little brother? And I just wanna clarify. You got to know that was like my 12th chance. God gave me a lot of chances. I squandered a lot of them, but I think the one that took might have been my 11th or 12th.
Brother, listen, I got a similar testimony, man. We know that all we can say is God is good, he's faithful, and how they say in the church, he was faithful even when we wasn't faithful, man. But I'm grateful that God would preserve those that are like us, because we become the key cogs in making this kind of work. We love and respect our politicians. We pray for them even if you don't love them or agree with them, because we understand that they have their role. We pray for the police department because they have their role. We pray for everybody in their respective places, but there's nothing like the people who have those testimonies like we have, the grassroots movement. And man, I want to tell you publicly, and you've heard me say it to you privately, when it comes down to being a guy with a testimony that said, I'm going to dedicate my life to this work, I don't know anybody else that has kind of done that in the way that you have, man. I really honor God for who you are.
Thank you for that, little bro. And that's what it's about. I mean, you can't change and experience change and be genuine about changing your surroundings if you're not telling people how and you're not giving back to it. So that's my role now. Not only have I done it like you, I'm willing to tell people how I did it and all the mistakes I made along the way so they won't make them too.
Man, that's awesome. Awesome. Miss Phyllis, how you doing? Miss Phyllis is one of those moms that's been in my life since a child. Dr. Vaughn, thank you for being with us tonight. So let's get right to the conversation, man. We are 3 years, is it 4 years into the consent decree? We 4 years in to the consent decree. The first thing I would like for you to do for some of our audience who may not know is kind of give them a little bit of an explanation of what the consent decree is. And then we're going to jump right into this thing that we're 4 years in, and where are we for real as it pertains to this?
So following the riots after the murder of Freddie Gray, we had the Department of Justice come in and they did what was called patterns and practice investigation of the Baltimore Police Department. Like you said, they did their investigation and they put out a report, and their findings showed that Baltimore has been engulfed in a practice of racist and oppressive tactics in Black communities, targeting Black people, mistreatment of Black people in their communities for decades. So the Department of Justice took the city and the police department to federal court, and essentially the consent decree is the settlement between the federal court and Baltimore City and Baltimore City Police Department, which agrees upon mandates and reforms that the police department have to make to be in compliance with what is now considered constitutional policing.
So, man, and we're going to jump right into the conversation. We are 4 years in to this consent decree. Where are we, man? Like, what is it? What is it doing? What is it not doing? I don't believe that there's any greater source of information that can give it to us from a grassroots perspective than you. Is this thing blessing the people of Baltimore 4 years in?
I think it could be the blessing of people in Baltimore. So what we got to recognize is the consent decree is about reforming the police to treat us right. So we're talking about 150 at least years of oppressive culture from a police department, which can't change overnight. So there's a process of first changing the policies, then crafting trainings around these new policies, then implementing the policies, and then the next component is actually deploying those new tactics on the streets. So we haven't reached deployment of any of those mandates yet. And I'll admit, Baltimore, we didn't have the roughest time with a consent decree of all my research I've ever seen, where we've had, since the beginning of this investigation, we probably had 5 mayors, 7 commissioners. We didn't have 12 city solicitors.
Is that all?
We've had no stability until Harrison came in.
I'm laughing, but talk to us about how that impacts this process, man, because I don't think people really give enough credence to the reality that instability has existed in the places where we need stability in order for this thing to work.
So a big piece of this whole consent decree thing is community policing. So as we went into a signed consent decree, in that first 2 years, we had 3 commissioners with 3 concepts of what community policing looks like. So there's their one deterrent right there. As always, the direction for the city should be coming from the mayor. And we've had our issues with the mayors over the past few years. So we couldn't get that piece right. So really what happened was we had this 2-year delay, I'll say. So I took over as lead community liaison mid second year. And nobody knew that we were supposed to actually give feedback on the policies because there was no community engagement around the process before I came in. So that's kind of what my role became, to create avenues to people to get into the process. But I think that begs to question is, one, how long are we supposed to wait before we start seeing things? And 2, there has to be complete clarity on this narrative now that we're having pushed out from our leadership, that somehow this consent decree ties into the homicides and the public safety of the city, where that's a reason why I have to step back and make sure people in our communities are being properly informed, because we don't have a consent decree because the homicides were out of control and the violence was escalating. We have a consent decree because the police were violent and the police were corrupt and they were abusing our residents. So the public safety piece and the consent decree piece have to remain separated, because we shouldn't have to choose, because we're the impacted population.
I'm glad that you pointed that out, man. And we talked about in many conversations where you have nothing short of educated me as it pertains to what the culture of policing and the history of policing has been in America, not alone just Baltimore. We had the great Edward Jackson, who is now out in Anne Arundel County doing his thing as a police chief in Annapolis. who is a historian on policing, man. This thing goes way, way, way back deep. When you start talking about the need and the necessity to change a culture, can you unpack that for us a little bit? Because I think when some people hear that, you know, and it's not difficult for our ears to immediately go gun trace task force. I remember we were at Sharon Baptist Church before we even had a consent decree, and we were in one of those public forums, and Lucky Crosby got up there with his crazy self, and he said the Western District has been beating the brakes off black men in Baltimore for as long as he been in West Baltimore. Lucky been there all his 50, 60-something years of life. So when you start talking about that culture, just so people understand just how deeply rooted this thing is, unpack that a little bit for us, man.
So I think it's important that people understand that this country didn't have police officers before slaves were emancipated. So conceptually, in this country, law enforcement was overseen by a sheriff, and he had his deputies. Post-emancipation, then there's this whole new influx of concern of all these newly emancipated black people. So there was fear that they were going to retaliate for centuries of abuse, or they were going to have nothing, so they were going to steal. So these police departments then had to focus on protecting the property of former slave owners and racists from the people they abused directly. And I think that's important to understand, that police in the dictionary means to keep clean. And people aren't dirt nor trash. So I've never seen a police officer with a broom in his hand sweeping Pennsylvania Avenue, none of that, where the culture of policing essentially was created around keeping the streets clean of us and controlling us. And that concept has grown over all of these years, where, I mean, they name weapons and initial street sweepers. What they sweeping? They ain't picking up no dirt and taking it to central booking. They sweeping us. So we got to understand that policing as a concept and culture is based on protecting racist ideals.
When we talk about this paramilitary organization that we know as, when we talk about this paramilitary organization that we know as the police department and the roots that it has in racism and slavery, and yet then we look at Baltimore's black leadership, a person like you, who is somebody that's been boots on the ground and understands not only the need to change a culture, what should we be expecting from our leaders? That's from the mayor on down to everybody else as it pertains to a contribution to the big turn that we need to see happen in the culture of policing in Baltimore.
So I think a bit, and I'll connect it with the consent decree, because it was also mentioned in more political terms in the monitoring team's first reassessment of BPD. So it says in that report that though BPD is putting forth earnest effort to accomplish and comply with the mandates of the consent decree, the city itself and its governing agencies need to be more proactive in its implementation. And that's the whole issue with me, is we haven't seen an investment in any avenue from the city into getting this consent decree done. I feel
so
like
tell me exactly, because what we do know already we have is there have been some boxes checked off, body worn cameras and a lot of the technology stuff that was a matter of ordering some equipment, right? Then we know that there's $1.5 million a year that's being spent towards the monitoring team and all of those. What is it that is not happening from a city perspective in layman's terms for people who just checked in on the chop shop that wouldn't know otherwise what to look for?
So there's no investment in crime prevention. There's no investment in the root issues. So now you have this police department under all of this strain to change, You also have escalated violence, and then the city allows the police the concessions needed because they say it's so violent right now. We have to focus on this. We have to focus on that. And sadly, that plays into non-reformist hands when they can say that it's so violent right now. That's why we have to be aggressive on policing. If you can recall, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, we talked about how if we don't address it now, we'll be addressing it again in 5 years. And essentially now the narrative is changing back to, what are the police doing? We got all these homicides, blah, blah, blah. We need to invest more into policing. And that's never been the case. The police never prevent crime. The police come after the crime has been committed, and they come to enforce the laws. So if it's a violent call that the police come to answer, they answer with more violence. That's their threat, is we're militarized, we're organized, and we have weapons. So that's the concept we have to undo.
You're on Live with the Chop Shop. We come to you live every Thursday. I'm your host, Pastor Marvin McKenstry Jr., and I'm live tonight with our guest, my friend and brother, Ray Kelly, who is one of the leading voices in police reform long even before it was popular, out here from a grassroots perspective, making change happen. And I think that that's one of the things I've always respected about you, Ray. You bring to bear the intersectionality of the conversation that a lot of people who claim to be advocates or representatives for the people will not. That the fact that there's no real energy and effort towards bringing what's necessary to prevent crime into play, it causes the police to still be able to operate by any means necessary type of a mentality. When I listen to other people, I listen to C4, and I love C4 and Brian Neiman's got to be my favorite show because it's so neutral. It's not, they're not picking a side on the political lines or any of those kinds. How important is it that we address all of it? You see this debate over whether we fly the plane or not, and some of the other measures that are out here that could impact crime. And philosophically and ideologically, people are choosing sides when we can't ignore the reality that we have big, huge problems.
I agree. And that's my whole issue. Right now, a lot of people are answering the question, do we reform? Do we defund? Do we abolish? And all those choices only affect Black people, where we shouldn't have to choose. We shouldn't have to choose between having a proactive, visible presence in our community, but we have to sacrifice our sons getting beat over the head when they get pulled over by the police department. So why can't we have defund? Why can't we have reform? We don't want to wait for the police department to be abolished, when really the whole idea should be to abolish this whole concept of policing.
So let's deal with that earnestly, man, because when we talk about the either ors, and Shaka put up there, why is it either or? The either ors are normally based on Black representation out of the Black community and which side we choose as it pertains to those who are advocates, activists, or whatever you want to call. Now, I get your aspect of why should it be either or, but we choosing sides. How do we unify? How do we unify and bring people together around a prioritized agenda that includes defund or reallocation of funds and all of the things, so that we don't have to make a choice and in some way sacrifice and take I like the way you put that. We even get crime out of our neighborhoods, but our sons got to get beat on the head in order to get it done. How do we unify? I believe that is the key to what needs to happen in our community.
I think that's the only way we can address this issue, is recognizing this issue from the perspective of the impacted communities, not somebody whose organization is located in the impacted community.
Wow.
But somebody that's been impacted by these past practices.
Yeah.
So many times you have people that read a story or studied a book in school and saw some numbers and feel like they understand the impact that it's had on those communities, where they don't quite understand what it's like to actually live that experience. They don't understand that even if little Bubby was selling drugs outside, when he get beat up by the police, that not only impacts his immediate family, his children, but every child that sees that outside. It also impacts how that group interacts with the police the next time they see them. So all of this is intertwined, and unless we're actually addressing the issue from the previously impacted to still impacted communities, then we're just writing papers and checking boxes.
Man, listen, and this is the interesting thing about it for me. You know, you was there for day one. I was a youth advocate, and the youth work that I did for years kind of drew me into police work when that really wasn't my lane. And I'm grateful, man, because I had Cherie Briscoe, or Ed Jackson, you, and others that were able to educate me. How important is it that people really, even 5 years, 6 years, 4 or 5 years in, right, that people get educated? I always have said that the consent decree is not a thing where it needs to be a thing. How understated it was in the last election really blew my mind, when that would need to be a central article, the rebuilding of police community relations and the completion of the consent decree for whoever was going to be our next mayor. It was something that was very little talked about, and that just blew me away.
And I think that goes back to the report and the way that, in my perception, that this process has been going. So we know that continued community input and education, that adds to the task of implementing this consent decree. So in my purview, it seems like there wasn't an intentional effort to make sure we were doing everything we can to influence this process. And by the time we actually got to a campaign season, you had so many other things to run on that was, I'll say, more appealing than an actual consent decree that's already moving forward. You had defund, and you had abolish, and you had all these public safety initiatives to kind of lean back on, where nobody, and that's what the monitoring team said, the city itself, our administrators, our legislators, elected officials, didn't do their due diligence to make sure that information was getting out there and people were actually engaging in this process.
One of our brothers who wears the uniform and does the job the right way, Major Jeffrey Shorter, jumped in, and I want to throw his question at you right now. Major Jeff, I think he's in the Northeast, where he's the commander. Can you bring that back up? I want to read his question verbatim, Shot.
Check your phone. Check your phone too, Marvin. I just sent you a text.
Okay.
With a question. Short is in the Northern District. He's the new major of the Northern District.
He's the Northern. Okay, so he replaced Rich. Hey, Shaq, yep. Can we get that? Can we get that back up there? Can we get Major Shorter's question back up while I'm responding to my brother Ray's request? All right, we're gonna keep it right on moving. He said something. He said something to the effect of, "What does it look like when we're talking about the outside?" Let me get it, because I can get it too from here. What does impacted by the outside versus the inside look like?
Impacted? You mean policies impacted, or
I think
the process of the consent decree?
Correct me if I'm wrong, Major Shorter. Pull it up, give us some feedback. But I think that he means from a community perspective, or people who are from Baltimore, because you know Baltimore BPD has had really lost a lot of credibility and leadership, because we've had so many leaders that are not Baltimore bred to understand Baltimore culture. So if I'm wrong, bro, correct me. But from the outside versus the inside? What does that look like?
So I think we have to look at it in this way. In their eyes, police feel like they're conceding something by instituting constitutional policing, where in our purview, that was never policing, that was excessive force. Where
Abuse.
Exactly. The consent decree did not change a single law. It only changes how the police department enforces the laws.
He said whatever impacts me. Outside meaning from any entity, not from a specific community. I got you, bro. You know, even when I think about that, I think the insiders and the insight of insiders is always a great necessity, because that insight is the thing that really helps you to understand culture. And what I mean by that is we talking about how I see Baltimore, what access points I have to communities in Baltimore that may be affected by crime, even the ones that you have, Jeff Shorter, as a person that wears the uniform but is beloved in the community because you choose to do it the right way. It's places you can go and things that you can do as an insider that those who are not doesn't have that same stamp, as my young people say. You know, when I think about Major Jeff Shorter, you stamped. When I think about a Shaka Pitts, he's stamped. When I think about Ray Kelly, he's stamped. When I think about the Kill Trices of the world, stamped. It's some brothers that have the approval and the stamp of the community because they've done right by the community. And I believe that there's a different level of access granted and a different level of communication and things of that nature. So whether you're talking about from the street level or whether you're talking about the police department or politics, it really bodes to suggest a different level of credibility in our community if, in fact, you have that inside perspective. And that inside to me means the love of the people, which translates to impact. I know I just kind of went on a rant, but we on live with the Chop Shop. We come to you every Thursday at 6 p.m. Like, love, and share this. Bring your comments because we are able to see and answer your questions if you're on the original broadcast, which is under the Marvin McKenstry Jr. page. Ray, you back with us, man. What you got?
So I want to just comment on Major Shorter. I feel like, for one, I was a proponent of his elevation. I felt like even though he is the police, and you know how I am with police, we don't agree on all of our ideals or any of that. But Major Shorter is a listener, where we know at this point we ain't found all the solutions, where we at least have to have top police personnel that's willing to still listen to the people to try to solve issues, still try to build relationships. Relationships is what makes communities safer. So even though police culture and police ideals are always prevalent in a long-time police officer, there are certain things as a reformist you have to be able to identify. And with Shorter, he has that ability and the willingness for real to listen. Can't say that about a lot of police. A lot of police come in saying, this is what I'm going to do. I'm not trying to hear it. You can't imagine because you know, but I'm known as the agitator, the table flipper, whatever the case they want to call me. But still, I'm allowed to come in those rooms and have conversations where we need that to trickle down into the district level and then further down into the interview level.
So let me throw this out there, because as we talk about Shorter, that's something that we know by relationship, and I know you have a long-term, let me be really clear, working relationship with our current mayor, who we're keeping in prayer. I tell people all the time, man, him succeeding means my city is better. Don't necessarily mean I agree with everything that he says and does, but him succeeding makes our city better. Have you guys had the opportunity, based on having that years and years of working relationship, to kind of sit down and look at Baltimore from the consent decree perspective?
We haven't had a real sit down since he became mayor. I'm still in contact. I'm like you. Like I said, we have a working relationship. I definitely don't agree with everything he does and a lot of his decisions, but we also have that relationship where we can check each other and converse about it. So we haven't had a specific conversation about the consent decree, and that's because we're in the midst of real change right now. Like we're about to get local control. That was our first recommendation on the CODIF, was return control back to the city. So now I know we're focusing on making sure that the local control.
I gotta stop you. I gotta stop you because I don't want to take for granted that anybody knows what local control is. Unpack a little bit. I get excited about the thought of local control. Explain what that is a little bit to our audience, and then continue on with the rest of your thought.
Well, to put it plain and simple, until from 1860 to now, the Baltimore Police Department has been a state agency. Even though the city assumes the responsibility for its operating expenses
and the liability when it messes up.
And the liability, we've had no ability to influence procedural policy with the police department, because that has to go through legislative session and be voted on by the entirety of the legislature, which we only have 3 representations, and 23 other people never been to Baltimore get to vote on our prowess of the police department. So for me, I think it's been like 9 years fighting different avenues and different solicitors on why we need local control of the Baltimore Police Department. And the simple answer is somebody from here who they are paid to protect and serve needs to hold them accountable. Right now, there's no local accountability for the police department outside of firing a commissioner,
which really has no real impact. And that's a great segue for me to go to my very next question, because we do know that the elephant in the room a lot of times when you're talking about the city government and you're talking about the head of the police department is large number 3. I have got to get your perspective on what the consent decree implementation and everything to do with police reform in Baltimore as it pertains to large number 3, which we know to be the Baltimore Police Union. I need to know, are they a hindrance? Are they helping? I know we still don't have a CBA. There's some things
we got a CBA last year.
Oh, we got the CBA last year.
We did get a CBA last year.
Awesome.
Which has to be now renegotiated because the Leah Board got repealed as well this year. So there'll be another collective bargaining agreement. How we address these new changes will have to be established. So yeah, it's a whole lot with how we progress. I will say that the FOP is nothing but a mouthpiece. They have nothing, not a damn thing to do with the consent decree. Just like every other resident, they allowed their public input and feedback, but they aren't at the table. They have no place in these negotiations. And at this point, the city is mandated by the federal government to implement and full compliance of those mandates. And it ain't nothing the union can do about it but talk bad.
So that's one, because I disagree with you. I disagree. Okay. And let me tell you what perspective I disagree. Because one of the things that we have experienced and we saw, you and I saw firsthand and advocated against, was work stoppages, right? And we do know that an organized body has the ability, if they don't have ability to influence policy, they have the ability to influence those that they represent. So and I don't think that was what you were saying, but I'm gonna put it on you, make you clarify. What are you saying that influence that they have over the rank and file here in Baltimore Police Department is not something that can impact how police reform occurs in Baltimore?
Well, it can definitely impact the pace. I don't think it can in any way impact the mandates of the consent decree. The bottom line is this city has to be in compliance, or there could be consequences from the federal court. Now, I'm going to take a step back because I know.
Yeah, step back, because I need
I'm
you
gonna,
to step
I'm
back
gonna
to
say
Pennsylvania Gold, brother.
I know what you want to hear, and it's a fact, and I'm not afraid to say it. Is the fact that even when we was on CODIS, how many officers said things like, "If we stop doing our job, they're gonna be begging us to come back. If we don't do nothing, when them crime numbers go up, they gonna want us to beat somebody over the head, do some street sweeps."
Yeah.
And that's exactly what they did, and that's where we are. So now we're feeling the impact of a lack of effective policing, and that is once again resurfacing the narrative that we need our police department to keep us safe, when in actuality, we need an effective police department that does their job.
So let me ask you this then, right? How important then is it, if that body has influence over the rank and file, how important is it then? I remember the difference in when I made national news as the CODIS chair, getting into a public argument with a police officer, right? And the FOP writing letters about somebody that they never met, versus literally, and you were there, coming downtown, sitting in a room across the table from me, had no idea who I was, and was thoroughly impressed. You remember at the end of the meeting, that's Marvin McKenstry?
Right.
How important is it then that we have, not even if not as it pertains to influence and policy, but we have them in the conversation to be able to say we're not alienated and left out? Because I think that's why they stay so adversarial. They spend a lot of time on the outside looking in. And I ain't endorsing the FOP. I'm just saying at some point, unity and everybody at the table that's involved need to be at the table.
So I'll say this. Like you said, I can remember me and you and Gene sitting down at the table and having real civil conversations about reform. I'll also say that it's about the officers. So you got to get leadership in the FOP that is open to actual reform in the police department.
Yeah, because that change came right after it seemed like the FOP started to listen. They got him out of there and got Mancuso.
Exactly. And we have to recognize that the union representatives that speak out on these police issues are speaking out for contract reasons. It's all about money with them, for real. They don't want to concede anything. They feel like they've created this way to make their job easier. Whatever the case may be, is you have leadership in the police union that don't quite see it from an equity or constitutional lens, but more as they have to concede something to the people to stop the noise, where we're saying you got to stop this unconstitutional policing and this corruption and this conduct, so we could just live and not have to have a fear of driving down the street where the police be at.
One of the things that takes place here that some people may not know about is the monthly conversations that takes place right down at the federal courthouse in Judge Bradar's courtroom. I've had the privilege as a member of CODIS to be in those conversations. What is your personal assessment of Judge Bradar, the person who has oversight from the federal court perspective, in his desire to see this thing not only be some boxes checked off, but to see it be real police reform in a city like Baltimore that needs it?
So I like Judge Bradar. I think Judge Bradar is 100% committed to implementing this consent decree. But I also understand that Judge Bradar is a judge who's overseen this criminal justice system that's been unjust to Black people since it was created, and legislatively the criminal justice system is stacked against Black people. So I feel like Judge Bedard's statement, even though I understand where he came from with it, is probably the most dangerous catalyst to this conversation about public safety, by saying that we're in a city with 350 homicides every year, and the city is required to invest in policing, and if they don't, there could be consequences, when in actuality, the requirements of the consent decree does not restrict the city government from investing in the stuff they know that needs to be invested in to bring crime down, to once again reinvest more funds into law enforcement, is clearly the definition of insanity. We invest $100 billion nationwide in policing, and look at the epidemic of violence nationwide.
So let me ask you this, right? Because when we look at the $500 million budget, and we see that our then city council president and second district council person, and the one who became Mayor Brandon Scott, saying that he was all about defund, reallocation of funds, and one of the first moves that he make is to increase the funding to the police department. When you saw or read or heard about that, what did that say to you?
Politics rule this city. So even people with ideals are willing to compromise that for the status quo of the politics in this city. And believe me, we've had our words and continued conversations about that budget. I'm with you 1,000%. If you ran on defund the police, defund the damn police. Don't talk about the procedural issues with the city budget process. We know all that. We are against the budget process as well, where if you are radical enough to lead an internal charge to retract $22 million from the police budget the previous year, what response do you expect if you reinstate that plus an extra $6 million for incidentals, I guess, in the following year? So for me, even though I understand the budget process, I know when it all started or whatever the case may be, if you had to present that budget, you should have presented your disdain with that budget when you presented it, where we are not going to accept from our defund mayor that this is the process. This is the way government works, because that's what we advocate against. Is the government has been stacked against us for 400 years. That's what we're trying to change. That's what this consent decree does. That's what defunding the police will do. And for you to say this is the process means your ideals of change are not the same as when you ran for office, in our perception. That's the way I see it. I don't know how everybody else in the city sees it.
That's truth. That's what it is. It ain't even a perception. You'll believe your eyes in this particular case, because they ain't lying. Ray Kelly, I got to thank you, my brother. I knew this was going to be a rich conversation, and I knew that this hour was going to fly, because every time it's one of these conversations, the time just seems to fly, man, but it's an ongoing dialogue. We definitely going to have you back. Before we sound off, I need you to give us your final thoughts as you are speaking to everybody who might see this broadcast, whether it's the politicians, police, the constituents. Just talk to the people and tell them from your perspective what gets us going in the direction so that we can be a healed city.
So I think the key right now is listening to the city. We're now in this position where we get to decide how we move forward. Do we defund? Do we invest in these alternatives, the law enforcement? How do we approach that? And I think that's going to be the key, is talking to every corner of this city and finding out where the viable, effective resources are. What organizations help people see and seize opportunities for employment? investing in our school systems and drug treatment and things of that nature. So that whole defund thing is the conversation to actually move our city forward. It's, for me, I don't use defund, I use divest. We have to find a way to divest $100 million from a law enforcement budget and invest those monies into proven community-based solutions that prevent access or the appeal of a life of crime, that creates opportunities, that helps bring resources to an impoverished community and change the trajectory of entire neighborhoods, that foster an environment of crime and violence, and show that in that community directly opportunities, poor resources. And I feel like if the city doesn't invest half of that Rescue Act money and opportunities, jobs, then we're spinning our wheels and we're doing the city a disservice. Where we can hire people to clean up this city, bring the second trash day back, bring some pride back in our city, and at the same time, we're creating opportunities and pathways for a lot of people that don't see any other alternative to get away from the streets.
Man, Ray, I want to thank you for joining us. As I said before, well, you know, it ain't gonna never be the last time we talk. But coming on the air, we're gonna definitely be continuing this conversation as we continue to progress into this administration and try to make progress in the consent decree process, because you have a lot more to bring to these conversations than just what we do around the consent decree. But I thank you for your expertise. I want to bring back on the screen my right hand and my left hand, my main man, Mr. Shaka Pitts on the ones and twos, techniques 1200s, because anything else is uncivilized. And thank you. I need everybody to tune in next week, because this thing that you got on the screen has just taken a turn. We're going to be talking about the cost of worship, and we're going to be talking about some of the expenses that goes along with corporate worship, specifically around music ministry. Now, there's a third person that's going to be on here, and he's confirmed today. He is the one and the only Pastor Neil Matt Stevens, one of my friends, who is a Caucasian brother, and he's going to talk about the difference culturally in how church is done. But we're going to have our friend of this show and great woman of God, Pastor Yania Wilkins, along with friend of this show and antagonist, my brother, Pastor Clay Burston. So this is going to be a spirited conversation that you don't want to miss, man. Listen, when you start looking at this music ministry thing and what the cost and what some musicians and how the culture operates, you don't want to miss this conversation. So I need everybody to tune in. And last but certainly not least, I have to thank my audience. I always say, if a tree falls in the woods and does not make a sound, and nobody's around to hear it, doesn't make a sound. Of course it does. It was just nobody there to hear it. But you guys show up and you tune in week after week on both YouTube and Facebook Live to hear what it is we have to say concerning our city. So thank you. Always look, tag a friend, put their name right in the comments. Make sure the people that need to hear these conversations are hearing these conversations, because although we don't bring on the quote unquote sexy topics, we talk about the things that are really impacting Baltimore. With that being said, I want you to remember 4 things. Always love Baltimore. I love my city. Love Baltimore, because love will even cover the multitude of sin according to the word of God. I need y'all to trust God with all your heart. Lean not to your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him. He'll direct your path. Don't sit around waiting on superheroes like Shaka, Ray, and Marvin. Be the change that you want to see. And remember, last but not least, we can be more. Thank you. I love you. We out.
Peace.
I can be more. There's nothing that I can't achieve if I just believe. You can be more. You can make every dream a reality. We can be more. Be more, be more.
Yeah.
I can be more.
I wake up every day and try to be more. I pray I be more. It's easy to achieve
In the world where the ladies crying, the baby's dying, I think we can create that space to make a way for the ladies to ride and make baby giants. Be more, believe, less play. I'm so in love with life. Little